Hey Wargamers, today Games Workshop released a new MetaWatch article over on Warhammer Community, and it goes over their general process for balancing the game of Warhammer 40,000, which is a nice bit of public relations, a nice bit of community building here. We've got an inkling of some of this stuff before, like in designer notes or other balanced Dataslate kind of articles, right? They've discussed some of this stuff in the past, but it's nice to have everything kind of put down in one place, and it raises some questions about how they are going to proceed and what it might mean for us as players going forward. Now, of course, everyone cares about balance, right? Whether you are a casual player or a competitive player or somewhere in between, or I guess somewhere completely different. You care about balance because that is just kind of one of the fundamental components of having the game work, right? So everybody cares about balance, and Games Workshop apparently does too, right? That should make good business sense, right? That you'd want your game to be appealing and balanced in order for the longevity of that product. So it's good that they're paying attention to this for multiple reasons. They say they want win rates to be about 50%. That means between 45 and 55%. And sure, that's a good enough band, right? Like, is there really something that is different about an army that has a 44% win rate versus a 45% win rate? Probably not, right? That like there's probably some noise in there, but still they're aiming for this 45 to 55% band, and that's great that they're paying attention to it. We've known that they've been paying attention to that for a while now, ever since at least 9th edition popped, but they gave us some insights into how they actually view those numbers, right? That they get numbers from a diversity of tournaments, right? It's not just the big kind of, national tournaments that pretty much everyone is familiar with. At least if you're, paying attention to Warhammer news online, you probably are familiar with. But it's also some smaller, more regional tournaments and, TOs from kind of across the spectrum, which is cool that they pull this wider data set. And they are interpreting those data with some caution, right? They're not just looking at the raw numbers. They understand, of course, that the game is complex. And like I say in every one of my Mathammer videos, that the Mathammer is just one part of the greater whole. And so they take into consideration things like, is this army relatively intuitive or is it more complex? Do we have these really front-loaded combos that stand out as soon as someone picks out a book, or are there subtler combos, subtler ways of playing that require a greater understanding of the core mechanics of the game and of the codex in question? So they take into consideration those different things when looking to tweak an army. And I think it's interesting, they kind of talked about in the article about how some armies are just, basically push them across the table and, pew pew, roll the dice. And other armies require a lot more finesse, which, we know, right? Like that's, an inherent part about the game. But that they really do apply that understanding of how the army functions when determining if an army needs a tweak or not, right? That, for example, Space Marines are a lot of people's starter army. So the numbers for Space Marines are affected by that. There are many, many more Space Marine games than there are Genestealer Cult games, as the example that they gave. And Genestealer Cults are an army that is much more tactical, much more based on finesse and making things line up in a certain order, right? And so when they see a small number of Genestealer Cult games, they interpret that within the context of a player base that is probably a little bit more familiar with the game and potentially more tactical thinking, whereas the Space Marine data are going to be reflecting a larger player base that's filled with much more new players and potentially less familiar or less tactically minded people in some context, right? And so that plays into their understanding, and it might be a little reductive, but I think it's interesting that they are interpreting things within that context, right? That they are exerting a lot of thought, it sounds like, into how and when they act on army. And especially they kind of call out the internet community, potentially me included, in their discussion of internet videos that kind of go through and list XYZ things that need to change. And they say, well, yeah, those things might need to change, but there might be a much simpler adjustment that we can make that would make all those issues go away. And that's true. And I think in the times that I've done that, in terms of like, I had a fairly well received video that was like 3 things that needed change in the codex, in the Tau codex. And I think that was more in the vein of the types of adjustments that they're talking about, and less of this like long list of, oh, well, Vespid need to have 1 more attack at +1 strength, right? Like, we don't need to get that granular about it. But I'm glad that they are taking this broad kind of synthetic approach to interpreting their data. The other thing that got me really excited about this article was their discussion of Mathammer. And they are looking at Mathammer in many of the ways that we have on this channel and many other people have looked at in other places, including things like offensive output per point, right? So offensive point efficiency. And they are discussing that there are thousands of data slates, or at least more than 1,000 data slates in the game, and so that's a really big data set, right? Of what you would need to consider in this kind of grander analysis, right? Like heck, think about how long it takes us just to go through one codex. They have all these other codices to go through as well, so that's quite a large set of data, but they have those calculations, and I wish this is kind of one of the big asks that I have in this video is that Games Workshop, James, listen to me. Share those data, right? Share those analytics. For one thing, it would make my job here a lot easier. But the analytics about the offensive point efficiency would be wonderful for the game, or at least for the community. I think there's still a lot that would need to be said around that, but having a database that lists out the offensive point efficiency and clearly spells out how that's calculated in terms of the assumptions that are made, right? Are we talking about rapid fire range, or are we talking about not rapid fire range? Are we assuming -1 to hit modifiers? Are we not? What are the assumptions that are going into these types of calculations? Or heck, even better yet, develop a web-based tool that allows you to just manipulate those assumptions and see the data laid bare in front of you. That sort of thing would be really cool for us to have, and it would show in part all of their effort, but also help us better understand what's going on with our armies and better utilize our armies in a way that we can make informed decisions about the composition of our forces and the purchases that we make. So I would really love to see that data set presented to the consumers. But the danger with that is that we can get into the same discussion that we have every single time we do a Mathammer video, and that is not the whole story. And they talk about this in the interview too, right? That's not the whole story. There's a lot more to the game than just offensive point efficiency, or defensive point efficiency for that matter, right? Like there's a lot that goes into the game. And so this tool would be really effective for people trying to make, unit-to-unit comparisons within a limited context, right? If I'm trying to say, all right, should my crisis suit have, a burst cannon or a flamer, right? If I want to figure that out using Mathammer, maybe I can do that comparison using this data set that they have, and come to a more well-informed conclusion. But if I want to do like, hey, what's better? Let's do this: a manta or a striking scorpion. Like, which one's better, right? That Dataslate isn't going to be very useful for that. So right? Those are very wildly different units and wildly different books. So, you know, I would worry that if those data were presented, that they would be frequently misinterpreted or misused in a way that would be very confusing without kind of a guide through those data, right? And that's one of the things that I try to do in my videos, right? Is contextualize the data in a way that makes sense, and not just, you know, plop the data down and say, you know, interpret it as you will. So, we got a little rambly here. I'm going to try to do more kind of sit down and talk videos like this that you know, I guess could be a little bit on the shorter end, depending on what we're talking about. But let me know if you want more kind of chit chat videos like this in the comments below, or, you know, what you think about the data that they're collecting and how they're utilizing it. Let's have a conversation in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Good news, we have more of the Invasive Wargaming model back in stock, so if you're interested in picking one up, you didn't get one before, or you want more, check out the links in the description below. Otherwise, I just want to say thanks again for watching, especially all the folks over on Patreon. This channel wouldn't happen without them, so thanks to Jack and Acker, Durza, Everett Keller, Robbie Goodwin, Jose Gomez, Drew Prattley, Michael Byrne, Zealous Brimstone, Scott Heater, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, and Shifty.